Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, Canadian, European, African, Asian channels and the news agencies, Reuters, AFP, AP. Now the headlines. Repercussion of Israeli retaliation against Iran in the world. Hypocrisy. U.S. Speaker of Congress Mike Johnson could lose his job on foreign aid bill. Recovery from economic fall. A man set himself on fire in New York during the Trump hush money trial. A suicide bomber arrested in Paris in Iranian consulate. U.S. put sanctions on far-right Israelis. New rules for Alaska oil industry. EPA designate 2 chemicals hazardous. Longer time for rest for air traffic controllers. Ukraine claim shooting down a Russian bomber. Russia says it's a lie. 8 people died in Russian attack yesterday in Ukraine. General election has started in India and they will continue for 6 weeks. Title 11 rules on Wall Street. Dow Jones gained, S&P 500 and Nasdaq went down. Now the news in detail.
Good evening, I'm William Brangham. Jeff Bennett and Amna Nawaz are away. On the NewsHour tonight, Israel allegedly strikes back at Iran, retaliating for last weekend's unprecedented drone and missile attack. The House advances spending bills on foreign aid with bipartisan votes, but Speaker Mike Johnson's cooperation with Democrats could cost him his job. And how people in recovery are helping a small town in Kentucky bounce back from economic decline and the opioid epidemic.
It was like I finally had found my purpose in my community. And when that happened, just doors opened that I didn't even know I was knocking on.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildman, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation, the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
On an American Cruise Line's journey along the legendary Mississippi River, travelers explore Civil War battlefields and historic riverside towns. Aboard our fleet of American riverboats, you can experience local culture and cuisine and discover the music and history of the mighty Mississippi. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interests. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. There is an uneasy calm tonight across the Middle East after both Israeli and Iranian officials had muted responses to Israel's apparent retaliatory strike in central Iran. The region had been on edge since an unprecedented Iranian attack on Israel and Israeli vows of revenge. Nick Schifrin has more. Nick?
William, it is not every day that something explodes near an Iranian military base during a time of intense regional tension. But today, that is exactly what happened, and all sides are trying to downplay it.
Near the central city of Isfahan this morning, Iran's air defense targeted what Iran called small drones. The former military and intelligence officials tell PBS NewsHour this was an Israeli strike near an Islamic Revolutionary Guard base and Iran's nuclear technology center. By day, Iranian state TV showed Isfahan quiet.
Life is going on according to normal.
And a local Iranian military commander said there's nothing much to see here.
در اصفهان شنیده شد انفجار نبود.
The sound heard early in the morning today in Isfahan was not an explosion. It was our powerful air defense firing at a suspicious object. It caused no damage or incident at all.
Which apparently is how both Iran and Israel wanted it. Iranian officials did not blame Israel. Israeli officials refused to claim credit. The only exception was an indirect criticism. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir tweeted one word that best translates to lame. But in Italy, after meeting Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani revealed this.
The U.S. was informed at the last minute, but there was no sharing by the U.S. It was mere information. But I think that what happened was also the result of the work of the G7.
For 6 days, President Biden and the group of 7 industrialized countries urged Israel to show restraint to Iran's unprecedented April 14th attack with more than 300 missiles and drones launched from Iran toward Israel. That was a response to Israel's killing 7 senior Iranian generals in an Iranian consulate building in Syria. In public, all U.S. officials would say today the U.S. didn't play any part.
I'm not going to speak to that, except to say that the United States has not been involved in any offensive operations.
And European leaders today urged more restraint.
It is absolutely necessary that the region stays stable and that all sides refrain from further action.
At one point last night, the U.S. was so concerned about further violence, it restricted the movement of U.S. officials inside of Israel. For perspective, we now turn to Suzanne Maloney, Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution, a Washington, D.C. think tank whose work focuses on Iran and the Middle East. Suzanne Maloney, thanks very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. What do you think the message is that Israel is sending to Iran of Brookings? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, a full jury has now been seated for former President Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial in New York City. Opening statements are set to start on Monday. And a man is in critical condition after setting himself on fire this afternoon in the park directly opposite the courthouse. Emergency crews extinguished the flames and rushed him away on a stretcher. Police officials describe the scene.
Court officers, members of the police department, they run into the park. They make efforts to put him out. They use their coats. They use fire extinguishers. Eventually, FDNY responds. We're able to put the male extinguisher on fire. And from that point, we remove him to a Cornell burn unit where right now he's there in a critical condition.
Authorities said the man threw pamphlets with various conspiracy theories into the air before setting himself on fire. Police in Paris arrested a man at the Iranian consulate today after he threatened to blow himself up. Officers swarmed the building and cordoned off the site. They found no explosives. The unnamed suspect was convicted last year of trying to set a fire at the same location. Paris is on high alert as it gears up to host the Summer Olympics. The Biden administration added new sanctions today on groups accused of raising money for extremist Israeli settlers in the West Bank. The action also targets the leader of a far-right group known for violence against Palestinians. The Treasury Department said those sanctions, quote, undermine the peace, security, and stability of the West Bank. Attacks on Palestinians have increased there since the war in Gaza began. The White House also announced today new restrictions on oil and gas drilling in the Alaskan wilderness. The rule limits development across more than 13 million acres, or roughly half of what's known as the National Petroleum Reserve. It also blocks plans for a road that would have cut through a national park to reach a copper mine. White House officials spoke about the measure today.
This administration will continue to take ambitious action to meet the urgency of the climate crisis, protect America's lands and waters, and fulfill our responsibility to the next generations of Americans.
Environmentalists welcome the move, but fossil fuel companies and Alaskan lawmakers warn it will have a negative economic impact. The Environmental Protection Agency has designated two so-called forever chemicals as hazardous substances. The compounds are used in many products, including cookware, carpets, and firefighting foams. The designation doesn't ban them, but it requires that their release into nature be reported to authorities, that the spill be cleaned up, and that those responsible pay for their removal. The announcement follows the EPA's decision last week to require water utilities to cut similar chemicals, which are also known as PFAS, in drinking water to near zero levels. The Federal Aviation Administration is requiring longer rest times between shifts for air traffic controllers. The change comes amid growing concern over fatigue following a series of close calls at airports. The FAA is investigating one such incident at Reagan National Airport in Washington yesterday. Two passenger jets came within 400 feet of each other on the tarmac before controllers told the pilots to stop. Ukraine's Air Force says it shot down a Russian strategic bomber in a remote area of southern Russia, but Moscow insists the plane crashed due to a malfunction. Neither claim could be verified. Meanwhile, Russian missiles pounded the Dnipro region in central Ukraine. At least 8 people died and nearly 30 others were injured.
The house was burning. Everything was falling down from the entrance, from the roof. It was dangerous to run out from the house. That's why many did not leave and stayed at home in hope that this will finish soon. But unfortunately, this did not happen.
To help counter such strikes, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to a special meeting of NATO defense ministers today for at least 7 air defense systems. NATO allies agreed to provide more such systems, but Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg stopped short of saying how many they would send. Elections in the world's largest democracy got underway today. Hundreds of millions of voters across India will head to the polls over the next 6 weeks. They'll choose 543 members of parliament and decide whether to give Prime Minister Narendra Modi a third term. In Chennai, lines formed hours before polling stations opened. Some voters are hoping for a change from Modi's Hindu nationalist government.
The first thing I came to vote for is to have a country without any religious disharmony. We've all come to vote. In Tamil Nadu, we're all together. Hindus, Muslims, Christians, we're all together.
Most polls predict a victory for Mr. Modi. If so, he would be only the second leader in India's history to win a third term. And on Wall Street today, stocks ended the week mixed. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained more than 200 points to close at 37,986. The Nasdaq fell for a 6th straight session, dropping 319 points. The S&P 500 slipped 43. Still to come on the NewsHour, the Biden administration releases updated Title IX protections against harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault on college campuses. And David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on the week's political headlines.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
On Capitol Hill today, one of the most significant votes of the year. In the House, the leaders of both parties worked together to oppose the most fiery voices in their own caucuses, pushing aid for Ukraine and other allies over a key hurdle. Lisa Desjardins is here and she joins me now.
William, this was a massive win for Ukraine. It was a loss for those who fear more involvement there, but it was also a day where we saw the House move away from the most conservative and liberal.
All this great reporting.
You're welcome.
The Biden administration put out new Title IX rules today that will increase protections for LGBTQ+ students and change how schools handle cases of campus sexual assault. These moves reverse several changes made by the Trump administration. Among them, sex discrimination will now clearly include discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. They fundamentally change the way schools conduct assault investigations, removing the Trump-era requirement that victims be cross-examined and that they hold in-person hearings. The new rules sidestep the controversial issue of transgender athletes, saying that that was still under review. For more on these changes, I am joined by the Washington Post's Laura Meckler, who has been following all of this closely. Laura, thank you so much for being here. So these rules go into effect starting in August. On this issue of LGBTQ+ students, it now says that it is illegal, very specifically, to discriminate against those students. That was not the case before?
Well, actually, the Biden administration has long held that it was the case before. They say that Title IX, which bars discrimination on the basis of sex, has always also included sexual orientation and gender identity as part of that. That is a way, essentially, to discriminate on the basis of sex. So that's how they've been acting, and that's how they've been adjudicating cases. But what this regulation does is essentially gives that more heft by putting it into a formal regulation that has gone through the full rulemaking process that says this is the official federal government's interpretation of what Title IX says.
And so on this issue of changing the rules with regards to how investigations are handled about sexual assault, explain to me what the situation was and now what these new rules do.
So, the question of sexual assault and sexual harassment on campus has been a huge one for many years now. Well over a decade has this been a hot topic. And in fact, the Obama administration tried to address this with its own set of guidelines. And then the Trump administration came, tossed out the Obama rules, and wrote their own regulations. And they set out a system that was sort of a court-like type procedure, where there would be a separate investigator who would be different from the person who made the judgment, and you would have sort of a cross-examination opportunity and a hearing. And it was a very higher burden of proof for what exactly would be considered sexual discrimination or sexual harassment under the law. So they had this system that was different in a couple ways. It was both sort of a more formal court-like system, and it was also a higher bar for proving your case. And so now what this Biden administration rule does is essentially revises that system with one of its own and makes tweaks in both of those, sort of gives schools more flexibility. They don't have to use these hearings. They don't have to have cross-examination if they don't want to, as a good example. And it also has a broader definition of what sexual harassment actually is under the law, so it would be easier to prove your case.
Help me understand what the Biden administration is trying to solve there. What was the concern with the previous regime?
Well, there were a number of concerns. From the point of view of sexual assault survivors, they were concerned that if you mandate a cross-examination type situation, that it would be essentially re-traumatizing for them. Of course, people on the other side would say that this is how you get at the truth, but that's what they said. The other issue was that colleges themselves did not like being put into the position where they were essentially becoming a de facto court. That they said that's not what we do, that's not our job, we don't feel comfortable with it. So that was another problem. And then in terms of the burden of proof and how difficult it is to prove your case, that's really about sort of where do you want those sort of scales of justice to hang? Are you going to make it a little bit easier for people who are alleging these incidents happen, these cases of harassment, or...
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
As Lisa just reported, Democrats helped Speaker Johnson get a foreign aid package over a key hurdle, but he still faces backlash from far-right members in his own conference. On that and the other political stories shaping this week, we turn to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for the Washington Post. Gentlemen, so nice to see you both. Thanks for being here. David, if someone had arrived in Washington today from outside the Beltway and they had seen what went down, which is a bipartisan group of people voting on something that they all agreed upon, and that thing moving forward, they would think, that's ostensibly what governing looks like, but here it's viewed as this unbelievably unusual thing. Like, what do you make of what happened today?
Yeah, well, first kudos to Speaker Johnson. I mean, to his credit, he's hung in there, and he's waffled and wavered and bobbed and weaved to try to keep his job. But in the end, I think he did the right thing for the country and the right thing for the world. And it was a test, as others have said, that it's important to respect democracy more than just the power of some angry minority. And when you have a broad majority of people, not only in the...
For years, the stories coming out of Appalachian coal country have been grim. Addiction, black lung disease, and economic decline. But a new story is now emerging, one where people in recovery are helping their communities recover. Jeffrey Brown reports from Hazard, Kentucky.
I love an actual book, obviously.
43-year-old Mandy Fugit-Scheffel has long dreamed of having a place where she and fellow readers could gather to discuss books in her small town of Hazard, Kentucky.
It's just so out of what I typically read.
But it wasn't until...
And maybe that keeps them from using. That's it for me. That's what drives me every day.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Hazard, Kentucky.
Late tonight, there are reports of a major explosion at a base south of Baghdad that's used by Iranian-backed forces known as the PMF. The PMF is believed to have participated in Iran's April 14th attack on Israel and have also, in the past, attacked U.S. troops. A senior Iraqi official says tonight's explosion is believed to be an Israeli strike, but that hasn't been confirmed. Iraqi officials say they will investigate. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you so much for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
On this Friday night, Israel strikes back. The attack on Iran, not the fierce response the U.S. and others had feared. Our calls for restraint being heeded.
We're committed to Israel's security. We're also committed to de-escalating.
honoring a Canadian aid worker who died while helping to feed Gazans.
He gave his life. He left his family. He left his country.
A funeral for Jacob Flickinger, killed by an Israeli airstrike. An Ontario First Nation seeks accountability after dozens of people became sick.
Will you shut the plant down? All options are on the table.
The crackdown on a chemical plant, will it finally lead to change? And pen pals with paintbrushes, handwritten letters from one of Canada's most acclaimed folk artists go up for auction.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is an uneasy calm after Israel made good on its vow to retaliate against Iran. The pre-dawn attack, which Israel has not officially claimed responsibility for, appeared to be narrow in scope compared to Iran's much bigger missile and drone attack against Israel last weekend. Video from inside Iran, which Global News has not verified, shows orange flashes in the sky, what appear to be bursts of anti-aircraft fire. It's believed the target was in Isfahan province, home to Iran's third largest city, famed for its palaces, mosques and minarets, and also a center of military industry, both drone and ballistic missile production, and Iran's largest nuclear research complex. And north of the city, the Natanz nuclear facility, the most important center for Iran's nuclear enrichment program. The International Atomic Energy Agency was quick to say there is no damage to Iran's nuclear sites and warned nuclear facilities should never be a target in military conflicts. Reaction in Israel, Iran, and the United States has been muted, and there are tentative hopes this strike was limited enough to avoid Iran and Israel spiraling into uncontrolled violence. Our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Gamansing begins our coverage from Jerusalem tonight. Donna, here in Israel, we don't know the full extent of the strike in Iran. We also don't know if there's more to come. Right now, all sides are downplaying what happened. It was nothing, says this man, who appears either to be on patrol at the nuclear facility or the nearby military base. With tight regulations on which images can be made public, it's nearly impossible to get a clear picture of the scope of the Friday morning attack, as Iranian state TV only showed serene sights. Global News has not verified this video, but it appears to show the night sky only periodically illuminated, and some of those flashes could be from air defense systems. It's a stark contrast to the swarm of drones and missiles Iran fired towards Israel last week.
Israel confined itself to something which is very, very limited and well thought of. I can say that, in my opinion, it was definitely in kind of an agreement with the United States.
After facing harsh and persistent criticism for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Israel is again enjoying close relations with many of its allies. America, along with some European and Arab nations, helped Israel protect itself against Iran's attacks, which it argued were justified after one of its consular buildings in Syria was struck April 1st. Israel never took responsibility for that strike and hasn't taken responsibility for the one in Isfahan either.
I think the situation in the Middle East is complicated, but Israel will always win, and everybody needs to know that.
I'm afraid. What will happen now?
In Tehran, another large, loud rally with calls for the end of Israel. The Zionist regime should know that if it makes a mistake this time, it will be punished harder and more severely, says this Iranian army commander. While Israeli military officials are not commenting, far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir did take to social media. He posted one word in Hebrew. When translated in English, it reads, weak. People here in Israel and right around the world are now waiting to see what comes next, especially given Monday is Passover, a major Jewish holiday. Donna? Crystal Gamansing in Jerusalem, thanks. This was not a full-scale attack on Iran, which is what Israel's allies had feared it might launch and which they had warned against. Israel fended off Iran's attack last week, and President Biden had urged Israel's prime minister to take the win. Today, there were no angry statements and no vows of further retaliation, and that, observers say, is a relief. Jackson Prosco reports from Washington.
Israel's closest ally was quick to distance itself from the strike.
The United States has not been involved in any offensive operations.
After a week spent urging Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to retaliate against Iran, the U.S. joined a chorus of Western nations, including Canada, calling on both sides to show restraint.
And we need to move towards peace and stability in the region. We need de-escalation.
Reports suggest the White House did receive warning of Israel's plans, but neither condemned nor endorsed the Israeli action.
We do not have any comment on the reports at this time.
Indications are Israel's limited response has at least tacit approval in Washington, potentially deterring Iran without sparking the kind of conflict that would inevitably force the U.S. to rush to Israel's defense.
The U.S. has not taken a position. They didn't say this was too far or too little. They just said, you'll do what you need to do. We're not going to be joining in with you.
None of it has changed American support for Israel, with the Biden administration said to be weighing more than $1 billion in new weapon sales to a nation it has repeatedly asked to show restraint. Any new weapon sales would be on top of the $26 billion in aid the U.S. is already preparing to approve for Israel. Friday, the foreign aid package took a big step forward in Congress with bipartisan support. It also includes $61 billion for Ukraine, and a final vote to approve the deal for both countries could come as early as this weekend. Donna?
Okay, Jackson in Washington, thanks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told NATO members today they must decide whether Ukraine really is an ally, and he said the way to show it is by accelerating the supply of weapons. Zelensky pleaded with NATO for more help today, describing levels of foreign aid as very limited. He said Ukraine's skies must become safe again and that NATO must decide whether life is indeed equally valuable everywhere. A Russian attack on the Dnipro region in Ukraine has killed at least 8 people. Those airstrikes severely damaged a residential building and critical infrastructure, including a major train station. Ukraine says it later downed the Russian warplane that launched that air assault. 3 men have been detained in Poland on suspicion of attacking a close ally of Alexei Navalny. Leonid Volkov was the chief of staff for Navalny, who died in a Russian prison. Volkov was attacked with a hammer in March outside his home in Lithuania, where he lives in exile. Poland says the attack was ordered by a Belarusian working for the Russians. 2 Polish citizens known to police are accused of carrying out the attack. Family and friends of Jacob Flickinger, the Canadian aid worker killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza, gathered today for his funeral. Dozens joined Flickinger's family in a procession to the church south of Quebec City, where the 33-year-old was baptized as a child. Veterans who served alongside him in the Canadian military were there and described him as one of the strongest people they've ever met.
He was like a hero for us because he went there and fought for his country in Afghanistan. Now he was doing that to help people, because they needed food, and that happened. So we're pretty shocked today.
Flickinger was one of 7 employees of the World Central Kitchen who were helping to feed the hungry in Gaza when they were killed by an Israeli airstrike. He was a dual citizen, and a second ceremony will be held for him in Washington, D.C. next week. The Ontario government is cracking down on a chemical plant after dozens of people in a First Nation became sick this week. Extremely high levels of the cancer-causing chemical benzene were detected in Amjinong First Nation, southwest of Sarnia. That community is surrounded by petrochemical plants within a 25-kilometer radius. People there have been exposed to high levels of dangerous pollutants for years. Now, in response to growing public concern over the spike in benzene readings, the province says it is taking action. But as our chief investigative correspondent Carolyn Jarvis reports, people who live there have little hope it will amount to change.
After benzene readings in Amjinong First Nation reached alarming levels this week, what community members became furious about is that no one sounded the alarm, notifying them about the potential danger.
People knew about readings, why wasn't somebody informed?
We need to know that they've got these monitoring systems in place and that they're actually using them.
Now, the Ontario government says it's going to change that. Global News obtained a provincial order the Ministry of the Environment issued late Thursday to the chemical plant it says is the primary source of those benzene levels, Ineos Styrolution. The order gives the company 1 week to provide a written plan to reduce the benzene levels, 2 weeks to have a procedure in place to notify the public when emissions exceed a new health benchmark, like the reading seen this week, and a month to complete an investigation into the source of the apparent leak. The order also indicates Ineos is already investigating the cause of the emissions. The company previously told Global News it meets all regulated standards.
It's not as if we have to find a solution. They're cost-effective and they're readily available.
Amjinong First Nation has demanded the plant be shut down until the company can show the air is safe to breathe. But when we asked the minister Friday, will you shut the plant down?
All options are on the table. So as of last night, we have promptly issued a new order that the company Ineos has to follow.
This will be now the 4th provincial order you have issued to this same company over the last 5 years, all with respect to reducing benzene emissions, and yet the levels keep going up. So why should they believe that this new latest provincial order will be any different?
Right, we made it really clear as to what the next steps need to be done, and we'll continue to ensure that Ineos is responsible for their pollution, their emission, and we will do whatever it takes to hold them to account.
The ministry has also indicated it's looking at updating regulation, which would allow it to issue penalties of up to $100,000 for companies that exceed new, lower health benchmarks. Despite years of high benzene readings at Ineos' fence line, the plant has never been fined by the government for its emissions.
No, there's no prosecution. The ministry lacks the capability of enforcement.
Just last month, Amjinong's chief testified before a Senate committee debating a new bill to address environmental racism.
We want to feel confident that the air that we are breathing isn't slowly killing us, and that our children will not get sick and die before us.
He has now hinted Amjinong may take legal action to protect the community. Carolyn Jarvis, Global News, Toronto.
You can find out more about the chemical leaks and spills around Sarnia, Ontario on our website. Carolyn Jarvis investigates in a Global News special presentation called Canada's Toxic Secret. There was quite a moment outside the courthouse in New York City today where former U.S. President Donald Trump's trial is taking place, and a warning what happened is disturbing. A man is in critical condition after setting himself on fire. Police say the man from Florida threw what they describe as conspiracy-type pamphlets into the air and then doused himself with an accelerant and lit himself on fire. His motive is unknown. Inside the courthouse, jury selection finished today. All 12 jurors and 6 alternates have been picked. Opening statements are expected Monday. The case centers around hush money paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels in an alleged scheme to cover up negative stories about Trump before the 2016 presidential election. Alberta braces for an historic drought. Coming up, how farmers will have to work around strict new rules on water usage. And she's back with more. Pop music titan Taylor Swift drops her latest album.
Canadians want to be informed. That's why more Canadians than ever are turning to Global News at globalnews.ca, one of the most visited news sites in Canada, on YouTube, where Global News is the #1 news source in the country, with the Global TV app, or streaming Global News 24/7 on a smart TV, for the most extensive news coverage available on all platforms. Canada's trusted source for news, Global News.
24 घंटे यूज करें मुसलसल। तो आप एक दफा ऑन कर दिया, अब उसको बंद करने की जरूरत नहीं है, 24 घंटे चले। GTF ऐप गोली की स्पीड में चलेगा। GTF ऐप चलाएगी।
Nearly 1 billion people have begun voting in what will be a long process in India's election. Voters began lining up before dawn. About 970 million people, or about 12% of the world's population, are eligible to cast a ballot. It's such a huge operation that voting is staggered and will run until June 1st. This election is seen as a referendum on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's trying to secure a 3rd straight term. He is popular but faces criticism for his hardline Hindu nationalism, which has aggravated religious tensions in India. The UN has said global drought resilience is not a matter of choice but a necessity, and there are already water shortages in several parts of the world. In Colombia, the entire country has been hit by drought. In the capital, Bogota, couples have been told to shower together to conserve water. In North America's biggest city, Mexico City, which relies on underground aquifers, water shortages are common. The city has resorted to trucking in water to supply residents. Here in Canada, there are warnings of what's to come too. A rapidly heating planet means warmer winters and smaller snowpacks, which creates the prospect of serious and prolonged droughts. This is the picture in Canada right now. The gray is extreme drought. The area is surrounded by large sections of red, severe drought, and orange, moderate drought. Parts of Western Canada are in the danger zone, including much of Alberta. Stakeholders there have signed a series of historic agreements about how water will be shared as farms, municipalities, and industry are bracing for what could be the worst drought season in 23 years. As Heather Yorks West explains, there will be some significant sacrifices needed.
As Stephen Vandervalk works on getting his last year's crop to market, his mind is on the growing season ahead.
Start the year with my plan.
Like many producers in semi-arid southern Alberta, Vandervalk depends on irrigation to water his crops. But this year that water will be in short supply.
When it comes to water this year, we must all do with less.
Facing what could be the worst year of drought in more than 20 years, water users across southern Alberta have negotiated an historic deal on how to share a potentially scarce supply. While industry won't be required to make any cuts, municipalities, including Calgary, will reduce their use by 5 to 10%, while irrigating farmers, which hold the legal right to most of southern Alberta's water, will see their allocation cut in half.
Farmers are now having to plan for a season knowing they'll receive just a fraction of the water they usually require. That's leading to some difficult decisions. Some fields may not see any seed this year at all.
It's going to be sort of new. Like it's very rare to be on allocation, and so I don't know exactly. To be totally honest, I don't know exactly how we're going to manage it quite yet.
But what's new this year could soon become the norm, with climate models for the region predicting a shorter snow season, the complete loss of mountain glaciers, and a new reliance on what could be infrequent rainfall.
That's a very different hydrological system than we have now, and we have to prepare for that. It implies much greater variability,
making water an increasingly precious commodity right across the prairies. Heather Urix, West Global News, near Fort Macleod, Alberta.
Surf's up ahead. Could this be the world's biggest wave ever ridden? This is Nazare, Portugal, where some of the biggest waves on the planet are produced, and video released today shows what could be a record setter. German surfer Sebastian Studner dropped into this wave earlier this season. The height of it was calculated using drone technology, which measured it at 28.57 meters. If officially ratified, that makes it the biggest wave ever surfed. Well, 2 hours after Taylor Swift dropped her highly anticipated new album, she announced a big surprise. It's a double album.
I hate it here, so I will go to secret gardens in my mind.
The Tortured Poets department features 31 songs on 2 albums, most of them about heartbreak. Swift posted on Instagram that she had written so much tortured poetry in the past 2 years, she wanted to share it. Special connection next, the beauty of handwritten pen pal letters between 2 Canadian artists. There was a time in the pre-digital age when pen pals were a thing, and getting a letter from someone far away who you'd never met was the biggest thrill. Well, now 6 letters from the 1960s between Canadian pen pals have sold at auction for thousands of dollars. They were sent to an artist in Ontario by an artist in Nova Scotia named Maud Lewis. Heidi Petrachuk has the story of a beautiful long-distance connection.
At this Ontario auction house, items constantly come and go.
Oh, this is marvelous.
And these letters mean the world to Sheila Kinnear. Written to her father, John Kinnear, in the 1960s by Maud Lewis, the Nova Scotia folk artist who lived and died in poverty. Her works now sell for tens of thousands of dollars.
Dear Mr. Kinnear, received your letters. Yes, I like the paint very much.
John Kinnear was a Second World War veteran who started painting full-time after retirement and heard about the diminutive maritime artist who used the very walls of her home as her canvas, often unable to afford supplies.
He always had said, it's never too late to help someone. You might be the only one that does.
So John started sending Lewis what she needed, and the correspondence began.
When you read them, it touches your heart. It really does. It's like looking at one of her paintings.
Maud Lewis died in 1970 at age 67. John showed the letters to his daughter just before he died in 2003 at 81.
They need to be in the hand of someone who's going to appreciate them, collect them, and revere them for Canadian art history.
Her paintings, of course, were her life. But in this case, the letters give us a glimpse into her life that maybe the painting couldn't do.
$6,500 for this exciting package. Sold right there.
And so last week, the letters sold to a collector for $8,000.
She's got a global awareness now. Her prices are going up. People are collecting her. I only wished it could have happened while she was still alive. I would have liked to have seen that. This one, the January...
After holding the letters to her father for the last time, Sheila knows the story of the unique bond between 2 artists is one she will always have. Heidi Petrachuk, Global News, Halifax.
That is Global National for this Friday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Bowen Island, BC. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Farah Nasser is at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Kenya's military chief died in a helicopter crash west of the country, President William Ruto announced Thursday, and declared 3 days of national mourning. Kenya's military chief, General Francis Ogola, died in a helicopter crash west of the country, President William Ruto announced Thursday, and declared 3 days of national mourning. The helicopter was carrying 11 people, including General Ogola, when it crashed Thursday and caught fire in a remote area near the border with Uganda, killing 9 people on board, the president said. It is unclear what caused the crash. General Ogola, 61, was on a tour of the country's troubled west region that has seen frequent attacks by local bandits. He was appointed Kenya's Chief of Defense Forces in April last year, after General Robert Kibushi retired. Political controversy surrounded Ogola, even before his appointment, when he was accused by the country's Electoral Commission chairperson, has been part of the National Security Council delegation that tried to influence the outcome of the 2022 general election against President Ruto. Ruto later explained that he called General Ogola before his appointment and said that, despite the election controversy, he was the most qualified for the job. General Ogola joined Kenya's military force 40 years ago.
Nothing will deter the UK on the contentious law that will enable it to send some asylum seekers on a one-way trip to Rwanda. Speaking in London on Friday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said this and vowed to make sure the bill was passed on Monday. His latest remarks come amidst the lingering controversy over the plan.
The priority now is to get this bill passed, right? At the end of the day, we've got to get this bill passed, and I said now very clearly, we're going to get this done on Monday. We don't want any more prevarication or delay. Enough from the Labour Party. We're going to get this bill passed, and then we will work to get flights off so we can build that deterrent, because that is the only way to resolve this issue. If you care about stopping the boat, you've got to have a deterrent. You've got to have somewhere that you can send people so that they know if they come here illegally, they won't get to stay. It's as simple as that. The bill is the way we're going to deliver that.
Britain and Rwanda signed a deal almost 2 years ago. The agreement has, however, faced multiple legal challenges and a back-and-forth tussle in the British Parliament.
The United States has vetoed a widely backed UN resolution that would have paved the way for full United Nations membership for Palestine. The resolution, voted on Thursday afternoon, would have raised the Palestinian status from a non-member observer state to full membership.
The United States continues to strongly support a two-state solution. This vote does not reflect opposition to Palestinian statehood, but instead is an acknowledgement that it will only come from direct negotiations between the parties.
This is the second Palestinian attempt for full membership at the UN. A Nigerian chess champion is attempting to break the world record for the longest chess marathon in New York's Times Square. Tunde Onakayo is aiming to play for 58 hours non-stop and raise $1 million for charity with a focus on children's education across Africa. Playing against American chess champion Sean Martinez, the Nigerian hopes to beat the current record of just over 56 hours. Onakoya credits chess with lifting him out of poverty in his hometown of Lagos, and in 2018 founded his NGO Chess in Slums Africa with the goal of supporting 1 million children to access education. Buoyed on by a crowd of supporters, Onakoya has said he plans to continue playing until at least 8 p.m. New York time on Friday, but given his energy levels, he could be playing beyond that.
Didier Drogba says that the revamped FIFA Club World Cup provided a great opportunity for African teams to become world champions. The former Ivory Coast and Chelsea striker was endorsing FIFA's plans for the tournament next year, which includes 32 teams playing in the United States.
With the Mondial de Club, it makes things a bit more recurrent, which means there's more competition every year, there's more games, there's more opportunities for players to be world champion. Imagine the feeling for someone who plays here in Côte d'Ivoire or anywhere in Africa, being world champion in front of all the big clubs like Chelsea, Barcelona, Madrid, and etc.
The first edition of FIFA's new Prime Club competition will include 4 teams from Africa, Asia, and America, 6 from South America, plus 12 European clubs.
When you look at the normal and previous FIFA Club World Cup, when you've seen Pepe Mazembe, for example, being in the final at the time, it was huge. And for a team like that in Africa, winning the Club World Cup competition, it will be, like I said, a huge achievement.
FIFA says the competition will be a major milestone for clubs from all confederations to shine at the highest level and the big stage. But the world's most decorated clubs have failed to book their places.
Join us in a little treasure hunt and find out why major players are scrummaging deals to get their hands on these rare metals in Power Scramble this April on CMA. This is Asia Now.
Hello there, it is 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Yasmin Yonkers. At this hour, world leaders urge calm in the wake of a reported Israeli retaliatory strike on Iran. The arch rivals remain muted in their response to the attack. Tehran says it has no immediate plans to retaliate. The G7 calls for Iran and its proxies to cease their attacks on Israel in the Middle East. The group says it's ready to impose further sanctions on Tehran to curb its, quote, destabilizing actions. And North Korea says it test-fired a new anti-aircraft missile and conducted a trial of what it describes as a super-large warhead for a strategic cruise missile. Leaders from across the world have appealed for calm after a presumed Israeli drone attack on Iranian soil. Israel has officially said nothing on the incident, while Tehran has played it down, signaling it has no plans to retaliate. Iran's foreign minister, though, warned that its response to further Israeli attacks would be immediate and, quote, at a maximum level. The US, too, has refused to be drawn into the issue. The White House says it has no comment to offer. And the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, speaking at the end of G7 meetings, said that the US focus has been to ensure that Israel can defend itself, but also avoid conflict.
The United States has not been involved in any offensive operations. What we're focused on, what the G7 is focused on, and again it's reflected in our statement and in our conversation, is our work to de-escalate tensions, to de-escalate from any potential conflict.
Calls for de-escalation came after explosions were heard over the city of Isfahan on Friday. Iran's foreign minister said that the nation's air defenses destroyed Israeli mini-drones and there were no deaths or damage. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has called for the cycle of retaliation in the Middle East to stop.
The Secretary General condemns any acts of retaliation and appeals to the international community to work together to prevent any further development that could lead to devastating consequences for the entire region and beyond.
And the immediate risk of a further escalation of violence between Israel and Iran seems to have died down, even as tensions between the two long-standing foes remain.
Both nations told the story of an Israeli strike on Iran in a muted way on Friday, pointing to a determination not to escalate the conflict, at least for now. No significant damage from the strike on the central Iranian city of Isfahan was reported. Iranian television reports played down the event, many not even mentioning the Zionist entity, Iran's term for Israel. All parts of the country are in complete security, this state broadcaster reports, while Israeli media cited reports from the New York Times and the Washington Post, which quoted unnamed Israeli officials as confirming Israel was behind the attack. The Israeli military and foreign ministries declined comment, and there were no immediate official statements. Israel is traditionally silent on issues like nuclear weapons and intelligence operations, though hardline security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir sent out the one-word message feeble on X. In Iran, President Ebrahim Raisi chose not to cut short a trip to a central province, indicating the country wasn't on high alert. A senior Iranian official told Reuters that Tehran did not plan a response now. This banner in the capital reads, "Israel is more fragile than a spider's web." Few seemed alarmed on the streets of Isfahan. Come on, that's not important, this resident tells State TV. In Tel Aviv, a similar sense of ease.
We're good. You can look around. We're happy here. Not of the attack, but we think the situation in the Middle East is complicated, but Israel will always win, and everybody needs to know that.
Uzi Rabi, a professor at Tel Aviv University, said Israel wanted to focus on Gaza and Lebanon.
Israel, for the time being, like the United States, like Iran, would like actually to end up this chapter and get some leeway for going for Rafah and then to Beirut.
The apparent attack was the latest in a round of actions set off by the killing of 7 Iranian officers in a strike on an embassy compound in Damascus on April 1st. Though Israel has never acknowledged that it was behind the strike, it sparked fears of a wider regional conflict spilling over from the war in Gaza. Iran launched a wave of hundreds of drones and missiles in response. It was warded off by the air defences of Israel and its allies.
Well, we spoke with Dr. Nicholas Westcott. He is a professor of practice at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and he tells us whether diplomacy can continue playing a role in de-escalating tensions in the Middle East.
Certainly the US has been in the lead of trying to persuade both Israel and Iran to step back from this brink, because the risks were very high of a wider conflict in the Middle East if they had continued to escalate. But I think not alone. I suspect other members of the P5, members of the Security Council, China, UK, other EU members, have also been active on both sides to try and de-escalate the issue. As I understand it, Israel has targeted some industrial facilities close to, but not including, any of the nuclear ones. They were therefore, if you like, sending a signal that we could attack the nuclear ones if we were forced to, but we are choosing not to do so. And as far as we can see, the damage was relatively minimal, and Israel's response was, we know where your facilities are, and we can hit them too. So it was very much a sort of tip.
NATO members agree to send more air defense systems to Ukraine after months of pleas from Kiev as Russia steps up its offensive. It comes as the US House is also finally set to vote on legislation that includes $60 billion more for Ukraine. Iran threatens an immediate and maximum response if Israel carries out more attacks against its interests. This after both played down an apparent Israeli drone attack in central Iran nearly a week after Iran's unprecedented missile and drone attack on Israel. And the largest elections in history are underway, with millions of Indians casting their ballots on Friday. The poll will take place over 6 weeks, as nearly 1 billion people vote in what's largely seen as a referendum on Narendra Modi, who's eyeing a rare third term as Prime Minister. Good day or good evening to you, wherever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First up, as Russia's renewed offensive continues across Ukraine, another 8 people have been killed in the eastern Dnipropetrovsk region. Russian strikes also destroyed grain storage facilities and food set for export in the coastal Odessa region. Across the border, a Ukrainian drone strike killed 2 people in Russia's Belgorod region, according to the governor. Well, NATO members have agreed to send more air defense systems to Ukraine, something President Volodymyr Zelensky has been demanding for months. Also, the US House of Representatives is finally set to vote this Saturday on legislation that includes a further $60 billion for Ukraine. These timely announcements come amid renewed fears that Ukraine could lose the war with Russia if more help does not come quickly. Nick Rushworth tells us more.
The more long-range weapons our soldiers have in their hands, the closer peace is. The valor of
the Ukrainian president, speaking to the NATO-Ukraine Council, called on NATO members to do more as a matter of urgency. Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine needs a minimum of 7 Patriot or other high-end air defense systems to counter Russian airstrikes.
Putin must be brought down to earth, and our sky must become safe again. And it is real, and it depends fully on your choice. Choice whether life is indeed equally valuable everywhere. Choice whether you have equal attitude to all partners. Choice whether we indeed are allies.
The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said at that meeting that allies have agreed to give more air defense.
NATO has mapped out existing capabilities across the alliance, and there are systems that can be made available to Ukraine. So expect new announcements on air defense capabilities for Ukraine soon.
Poland has 2 Patriot missile batches but needs them for its own defences. Germany said last Saturday would give 1 in addition to 2 already supplied. 5 other NATO countries also possess Patriots. The Netherlands announced on Friday €200 million for air defense and artillery ammunition. In Washington, meanwhile, a House vote on an international aid package that would include almost $61 billion for Ukraine has been brought forward to Saturday. The Pentagon says it could get weapons moving to Ukraine within days if the legislation passes.
We would like very much to see the supplemental passed, and we would like very much to be able to rush the security assistance in the volumes that we think they need to be successful.
Zelensky says troops need long-range missiles and artillery shells now, and says American support has been in question for too long.
France 24's Emmanuel Chaz is in Kiev. She told us how important the NATO announcement was, particularly in light of Russia's renewed offensive.
That's significant for Ukraine. If you don't hear the edge in President Zelensky's voice when he voices his concerns, when he's warning the allied countries that Ukraine doesn't have enough for its air defense, well, you can definitely feel the edge here in Ukraine. I'm talking to you not from outside, simply because I have to take shelter because the country is yet another time under a general air red alert. So that means there's yet another Russian threat of missile drones being launched. This was the case today in the early hours against the entire country, but principally against the region of Dnipropetrovsk, especially in the city of Dnipro. 8 people died in this region, including people in the city center, civilians. There's over 30 people who have also been injured during those strikes. They are often falling on civilians, not only on infrastructures. Energy infrastructure has been recurrently hit over the last few weeks by Russia, but civilians really bear the brunt. And we see why President Zelensky is, really making a point with the allies, with NATO members, saying, yes, we need more air defense. He says at least 7 air defense systems are needed to address the immediate and most urgent needs. But of course, more would allow also Ukraine to secure its skies more than is the case now. We see it, we feel it here in Kiev as everywhere else in the country. There simply isn't sufficient ammunition, air defense system to protect the country. And like I said, civilians are paying the price for it.
Very much as in Kiev there. Now to Gaza, where Israeli airstrikes have reportedly hit parts of Rafah. That's where over half of Gaza's 2.3 million people are sheltering. Residents and Hamas officials said at least 9 people, including 4 children, were killed as 2 apartments were bombed. In central Gaza, strikes destroyed at least 5 houses in the Al-Nusayrat refugee camp. Hamas says over 34,000 people have been killed in Gaza after 6.5 months of Israel's war in retaliation to the 7th of October attacks. While tensions remain high across the region, Iran has threatened an immediate and maximum response if Israel carries out more attacks against its interests. This after an apparent Israeli drone attack Friday in central Iran. Tehran said it had shot down 3 Israeli micro-drones in Isfahan province, which caused no damage. Both parties have played down the incident, a possible indication they may be ready to draw a line under Iran's unprecedented missile and drone attacks on Israel last weekend. France 24's Tom Kennedy tells us more.
The conflict in the Middle East escalates. However, after suspected strikes on Iran by Israel, Tehran has downplayed their importance.
This operation showed the Islamic Republic's authority and the ability of our defensive systems, our people's will of steel and dedication to the revolution.
Iran's state media reported explosions in the central province of Isfahan. Israel had warned it would hit back after Iran fired hundreds of missiles and drones almost a week ago, in retaliation for a strike that leveled Iran's consular annex in Syria.
The sound that was heard this morning in Isfahan was not an explosion. It was the firing of the rockets of the powerful air defense systems at an object in the air, and there was no damage from that.
In Israel, locals are worried about an all-out war breaking out, but at the same time, some believe diplomacy is futile.
Diplomacy is not a real solution for Iran, because Iran said in law they want to kill Israel.
US President Joe Biden has promised ironclad support for Israel, but also urged it to think carefully and strategically before a response that could trigger a wider war.
You're watching France 24 time now. We'll look at some of the other world stories making the headlines. In Ecuador, a second mayor has been killed within just a week, days ahead of Sunday's referendum on tougher measures against organized crime. Jorge Maldonado was gunned down in Portobelo by 2 attackers on a motorcycle. He's the 5th mayor to be assassinated in the violence-racked country this year. After a year of civil war in Sudan, top UN officials have warned a risk of a new front opening in the western Darfur region. Rosemary DiCarlo, the UN Under-Secretary General for Peacebuilding, told the Security Council the population in the humanitarian hub of El Fasher was already on the brink of starvation and could soon be targeted by warring factions. Since the 15th of April last year, almost 15,000 people have been killed and more than 8.2 million displaced. And in Haiti, grim figures from the UN, which has reported more than 2,500 people killed between January and March this year. This amid an escalation of violence in February as powerful gangs launched a coordinated attack to push out interim Prime Minister Ariel Henry. Most of the violence was in the capital Port-au-Prince. Hundreds of thousands have been internally displaced by the violence, with reports of widespread rape and hundreds of people kidnapped. Next up, the largest elections ever to be held have begun in India, with millions casting their ballot on Friday. The poll is split into 7 phases over 6 weeks to ease the logistical burdens of allowing nearly 1 billion people to vote. The election is largely seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's eyeing a rare 3rd term in office. Jenny Shin reports.
From the Himalayan mountains to the Andaman Islands, India's election gets underway, one of the biggest in human history, with nearly 970 million voters, more than 10% of the world's population.
We want livelihood, bridges, ration cards, and pensions, including pensions for widows.
We were excited to vote. We're hopeful that something good can come in the future, thanks to these elections.
It's a vote that pits Prime Minister Narendra Modi against an alliance of 24 opposition parties led by Rahul Gandhi's Congress Party. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party are promising to tackle poverty and boost India's economy, on course to be among the top 3 in the world. While they hold India's Hindi-speaking northern and central parts, the BJP faces uphill battles in the east and south.
Modi has a lot of support in the north, but in the south, I think his popularity has gone down. Rahul Gandhi has more supporters in the south. People need a change here. I think he has a good chance in the south.
Critics accuse Modi of discriminating against India's 200 million Muslims to please his hardline Hindu base, allegations he denies. If re-elected, the 73-year-old could become the 2nd leader in the country's history to be elected for a 3rd term. But it's still too early to call. Voting is scheduled to continue for the next 6 weeks.
And finally to Nigeria, where polystyrene and single-use plastics have been banned in Lagos. Authorities in the country's largest city hope to put an end to what they describe as an environmental disaster. Polystyrene takes 500 years to decompose. The cheap material is commonly used as meal containers in hundreds of thousands of street restaurants, and old habits take time to change. This report from Shinwe Osondu and Moise Goris.
Lagos State organizes the cleanup of Lagos Lagoon, an exercise that has to be done several times a day, each leading to the collection of dozens of kilos of polystyrene and plastics. Human activity in the megapolis generates 13,000 tons of waste every day.
It's challenging because the landfills that we have right now are filling up. So one of our major challenges is how to divert waste away from the landfill, which means recycling more, reducing the amount of waste we generate in the first place.
Refuse trucks operate 24 hours a day. In this neighborhood, almost 900,000 people live across 17 kilometers square. Some residents place their plastic waste on the main roads to make collection easier, but the majority throw it indiscriminately into the public spaces. Polystyrene, a byproduct of petroleum, is a particular problem. It's flammable and non-biodegradable.
We can't expose ourselves to so much danger as caused by styrofoam. Styrofoam is poison. Is that telling me you can keep poison for a longer time because you have been emotional about it, and we can't afford to do that to our people?
For Nkechi Anya, the ban of the use of polystyrene and single-use plastic in Lagos is a good decision. However, she is losing tens of thousands of euro in sales. This wholesaler used to supply polystyrene packs to hundreds of street restaurants. The timing of the ban surprised her. In her view, it will be necessary to raise awareness to the millions of customers of these street restaurants.
It's not just telling us to stop using this. Teaching our people how to dispose their waste is very, very important. If not, nylon, bottles, everything, we still go back into the drainage system.
Offering residents more recycling solutions is one of the challenges faced by Lagos State. Only 8% of the city's waste is recycled.
And that's about it for now here on the France 24 Night Watch. Thanks for staying with us and see you next time.
By polystyrene packs to hundreds of street restaurants. The timing of the ban surprised her. In her view, it will be necessary to raise awareness to the millions of customers of these street restaurants.
It's not just telling us to stop using this. Teaching our people how to dispose their waste is very, very important. If not, nylon, bottles, everything, we still go back into the drainage system.
Offering residents more recycling solutions is one of the challenges faced by Lagos State. Only 8% of the city's waste is recycled.
And that's about it for now here on the France 24 Night Watch. Thanks for staying with us and see you next time.
Hello and welcome to Ion Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. These are our top stories. Kenya is in mourning and launches an investigation into the helicopter crash that killed military chief and 9 other senior officers. From tens of kilos of cocaine found in 2020 to more than a ton seized 2 years later in the Sahel, the UN warns drug trafficking is undermining security and development across the region. Political satire is thriving ahead of elections in South Africa, and the return of former President Jacob Zuma has brought this art form back to life. Kenya is now investigating the helicopter crash that killed the country's military chief. General Francis Omondi Ogola was among 12 passengers of the military aircraft that went down on Thursday afternoon, shortly after takeoff. 2 survivors are being treated in hospital, and the country has begun 3 days of mourning. Our correspondent in Nairobi, Olivia Bizo, has the details.
The helicopter crashed shortly after taking off, killing Ogola, Kenya's military chief, and 9...
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.